Good morning, classmates. I am going to talk this morning about the New Deal and relief from Piven and Cloward's Chapter 3, the book Regulating the Poor. So I'm going to do my best to cover as much of the New Deal as I can in a few minutes time, so bear with me. So the New Deal was a response to the Great Depression, and when Roosevelt was elected in 1932, direct relief to the unemployed, to the American citizens, kicked off using the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, or FERA, and the reality was that nobody really liked direct relief. It was, for some people, it was dehumanizing. They lost their sense of purpose for working, and even the agencies didn't really care for it because they started to develop a sense of entitlement. As the Piven and Cloward said, the gimme attitude, which seemed to only be getting worse, and people were expecting even more. So there's kind of a two-tiered negative response in terms of the, like I said, the loss of the sense of purpose, as well as the changing attitudes towards what relief was expected by the people. So the goal was never for FERA to be, for the direct relief anyway, to be permanent. It was a temporary boost to try to get the economy back up and running. And so later on, at the end of 1933, the Civil Works Administration, the CWA, was enacted, and it was funded by some of the residual funds from FERA and from the Public Works Administration. And the CWA almost immediately, really within just a couple months, it employed 4 million people, and they began building schools and roads all around the country. It was viewed positively in the one sense because, again, many people were employed who had previously been unemployed. They were actually working for their money rather than just being handed money. But then on the other side, it was definitely seen as a threat to private enterprise. And I think this quote from an exasperated individual from a letter that they wrote to the administration kind of demonstrates some of the frustration. And it says, "I wouldn't plow nobody's mule from sunrise to sunset for 50 cents per day when I could get $1.30 for pretending to work on a ditch." Yes, it was in all caps. So even before the days of Twitter and whatnot, all caps were used to express emphasis. So again, just like direct relief, there were positives and negatives to this new work relief program. So FDR was trying to reconcile some of the challenges that they had with business and industry, and so that's kind of where the National Industrial Recovery Act came in. It was an attempt to conciliate the concerns of business and industry, and work towards what they called a planned economy. So it did things like price fixing to halt deflationary trends, rather than what was happening before, as prices kept dropping and dropping and dropping, and then they were kind of set at a fixed place. And again, like all the other stuff, there's positives and negatives, right? So Section 7A, in terms of business and industry, was seen as a negative, as it allowed for collective bargaining of the labor. So this NIRA is really kind of it was a catalyst for labor disputes, as it literally put labor up against in business and industry. So along the same lines here, the SEC was established in 1934. It was established to regulate Wall Street, essentially. The economy at this point in time was starting to improve. There was an upward trend from where it was in 1929 through 32 and 33, and so this was an attempt to the SEC was an attempt to kind of regulate and keep things in that healthy place and keep them moving in the same direction. Because of the improving economy, the businesses perceived that they had the upper hand, and so that kind of informed some of their backings and their moves going into the midterm elections, the midterms of FDR's first term as president. However, the midterm elections clearly went in favor, emphatically went in favor of FDR. And he was empowered by the results of the midterm elections to kind of no longer feel like he had to coddle business and industry. So there was still uncertainty in the economy, and things continued to kind of go up and down. The midterm elections were definitely a turning point. So yes, after the midterm elections, the economy did kind of plummet back down a bit, erasing much of the gains of the early elements of the New Deal. But that's when, that's when the National Labor Relations Act and the Social Security bills were introduced, and these were bills that were, again, kind of both mixed in terms of positives and negatives. So the NLRA, advocated for stronger wages, less hours, shorter work days, and tax reforms to redistribute the tax burden. It was completely gutted in the Senate, and what passed was symbolic at best. And then the Social Security bill, it advocated for an unemployment to be paid by payroll taxes and an old age insurance to be paid by a tax on wages. And there were many states that had something like this in place, but the federal government is agreeing now to step in and help pay for the relief for the aged, the blind, and the orphaned. The reality with the Social Security bill was that everybody wanted it, but nobody wanted to pay for it. Laborers didn't want to pay for it. Labor unions, they fought against it. They didn't believe that the workers should have to give up parts of their paycheck. Business didn't want to pay for it. They didn't want to have to. Again, everybody's got their money. They want to control their own money. It did, however, pass the House 371 to 33 and the Senate 76 to 7. So it passed with flying colors. And then that led to the Work Progress Administration, WPA. This quote from FDR again kind of reinforces the move away from the direct relief to the work relief. He talks about the spiritual and moral disintegration, fundamentally destructive to the national fiber, and everyone recognized the need for people to produce, the need for people to be a part of the development rather than just receiving funds. Receiving funds had a place, but it shouldn't be for everything. So the WPA did ultimately replace and eliminate FERA. So there is proof that we can shut down a bureaucratic department. That's a joke. 10% of the national budget was used to pay for WPA wages and provide a security wage. So the security wage was between the wage from private labor and industry, but higher than direct relief. So it's kind of in between there to try to really push people into WPA and eventually into private employment. So by the bill passed establishing the WPA in 1935, and by 1940, the WPA was responsible for the building of 110,000 public buildings, building and renovation of 110,000 public buildings, 600 airports, 600,000 miles of road, and 116,000 bridges and viaducts. So really, I mean, you can see the massive impact that this had on our national infrastructure, as well as providing employment to so many people who needed it. And it's believed that this really did moderate the civil disorder. As people had work to do, they had provision for their families. It reduced a lot of that unrest. Again, the reality was only 25% of the unemployed were employed by the WPA. Only a real history buff probably knows the answer to this question. Who's Alfred Landon? I think it's the wild popularity of the WPA and everything that FDR had done up to this point makes Alfred Landon just a afterthought in U.S. history. He was the Republican candidate in the 1936 election. The Republicans barely even put together a campaign because the popularity of FDR was so evident that Landon just disappeared into the history books. So there was some resistance. There was the Townsend movement, which really wanted a $200 monthly payment to the aged. The conditions were that they weren't allowed to be employed and they had to spend the entire $200 in the 30 days allowed. They rallied approximately 2 million people nationwide, and 25 million people petitioned for it, but really nothing. It led to nothing because of the popularity of FDR nationwide. And the same with Coughlin. Coughlin and he came in kind of behind Huey Long and his followers. But again, the 1936 election just kind of put everybody at rest there. And the unemployment leagues stepped up as well. But again, this quote kind of captures it. Everything was so much better, even though it wasn't perfect, everything was so much better than it was in 1929 that FDR was just wildly popular. Any opposition to him or any critique of him was just a losing battle. So the WPA, did have its ups and downs. 36 and 37 employed, like I said, almost 4 million people. It was down by 50% during the in 37, and then during the recession of 38, it went back up, and then in 39, it went back down. And by 1942, the WPA was completely eliminated. They weren't employing anyone anymore. It's important to note that only 12.7% of the people who were employed through the WPA eventually got private employment within the year of being employed. Obviously that changed later on, but people weren't moving. Private industry wasn't growing at the same rate that the WPA was declining. So Social Security did start to send payments to the elderly in 1942. And there was a broad definition of dependent child in FERA, which did set the stage for the AFDC down the road. The definition included more than just orphans, but in general, children in need. Okay, and so then the end result of the New Deal and the waves, the roller coaster ride of the Great Depression was categorical assistance programs for the impotent poor, the old, the blind, and the orphaned. Thank you. I tried to cram it all into 15 minutes. I hope I did it. So I look forward to seeing all of your presentations as well.